September 5, 1905, the Russo-Japanese War was fought between the Russian Empire and the Empire of Japan over rival imperial ambitions. The end of the war led to Japan further in its quest for land and resources, and its sights were set for Korea. Korea's traditional culture was very unique, and it provided a lot of insight to who they really were. A series of significant changes in agriculture, industry, and religion in Korea began in the mid-17th century and made a great impact on virtually every sector of Korean society during the beginning of the 18th century. Rice transportation became popular, and irrigation systems were improved. Advances in farming resulted in dramatic increases in food production and raised the standard of living for peasants. With the cultivation of special crops, such as tobacco and ginseng, commerce and trade developed and flourished. The government began minting coins and collecting farm rent in cash. Commerce, industry, and technology prospered as well. There's also huge diversity in religion. North Korea worshipped religions such as Confucianism, Buddhism, Shamanism, which is a belief in ancestral spirits, and the minority of Christianity. South Korea, however, participated in practices such as Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. These religions all had an impact on Korea's socio-cultural development. Korea's government was involved in dynasties, as well as kings representing as leaders. The power remained in the hands of those in high positions, but mainly the Korean king. Japanese imperialism forced opposing groups to work together to drive the Japanese out. Afterwards, due to the eventual political differences in Korea, this led to Korea to be split into North and South. North Korea believed in governing by communism, and the South believed in governing with a standard democratic constitution.
Korea never wanted to be annexed by Japan, and Japan never asked for their take on the matter. However, Japan took Korea anyway from 1905 to the end of World War II. Not only did Japan take Korea over, they did not treat the Koreans well, which later led to major issues between the two countries. Korean imperialism was driven by the Japanese occupation of Korea. Even though the Japanese occupation of Korea was harsh and rough, Japan helped Korean imperialists to expand and completely modernize Korea in many ways. For example, Korean industry prospered due to the railroads and communication systems that were developed. Agricultural advances also occurred during Japanese occupation of Korea. Even though Japanese influence helped Korea's industry and commerce flourish, Japan's harsh rules restricted and restrained Korean culture. Japanese colonialism was dominant for the Koreans who lived there. Any hope of rebellion early on was quickly crushed by the ruthless Japanese military. However, Japanese rule relaxed somewhat after nationwide protests on their damaging, obsessive methods. Benefits such as rapid growth in urban areas, expansion of commerce, mass culture forms, and widespread radio and cinema became staple parts of Korean societies. After eventually, the Japanese surrendered to the Chinese in a war between the two, but Koreans were forced to work in factories and fight as soldiers. Korea's most important and positive, impactful contact with imperialism was when Japan annexed the peninsula and took them over without their consent. This was important because not only did their leaders change, the country was literally merged into Japan. The very base of Korea's government, political, and economic pillars were built on Japanese ideology, so Korea changed its political structure agreeing to this. However, in the records shown today, it was revealed that there really was no official formal agreement between the two.
Japan had annexed Korea for a very considerable amount of time, and despite their best efforts to lessen Japan's cruel behavior against them, the Sino-Japanese War broke out between the Qing dynasty and Japan for control over Korea. This war caused major difficulties for men and women alike, who were forced to assist the Japanese in their affairs of their soldier, as well as comforting their women. Tens of thousands of people were drafted and forced to work in various harsh conditions until they were fed up with their mistreatment. When Shanghai was captured by Japan, the Korean government finally took part in the war against Japan with their organization of the Korean Restoration Army. This army consisted of independence fighters in China, and with the help of the Allied forces and Japan's surrender in 1945, 35 years of Japanese control had finally ended. A major event that occurred during Korea's decolonization was the creation of the 38th parallel. The United Nations started noticing the mistreatment of the North Korean people and wanted to intervene. As a result, 16 nations were led to war with North Korea. UN troops began pushing North Korea forces back until they reached the border between China and North Korea. China felt threatened and assisted North Korea. After many grueling months of fighting, the UN was forced back to the 30th parallel. Eventually, a ceasefire agreement was signed between the nations, and a pact was later signed that declared the 30th parallel as the dividing point between the two countries. This marked the moment when the lines between two countries, North and South Korea, were established indefinitely. For the long-term impacts on Korea, modernization heavily influenced Korea in a positive way. However, as the Japanese kept its efforts to imperialize Korea, Korea's economy depleted, and as a result, many people were poor due to the lack of support from Japan. Korea's environment was of poor quality as well. Minimum wages and poor payment made Korea feel like a state of despair, especially with North Korea too. In present-day times, United States-Japan cooperation for the defense of South Korea became so close that some specialists said it would create a virtual alliance among the three countries, and have credited it with deteriorating war against in East Asia despite North Korea's steady pursuit of nuclear weapons and regular flare-ups and crises, such as in 2003 and 2009. Despite major conflicts in the past between South Koreans and the Japanese, and due to their close proximity in each other and the dangers they face with North Korea, they have begun to accept each other as countries and continue to prosper and advance themselves for generations and generations.